Good afternoon, Internet, and welcome to Group Breaker Movies, the show where I talk about my unpopular opinion regarding films and small aspects of films. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Forrest Gump. Now, if you have not seen Forrest Gump, what the fuck are you doing? Forrest Gump is a beautiful movie. It's interesting. It's an all-around great film. I know I'm building it up, but I really do love the movie. It's well-directed, well-acted, and the story is fantastic. So, what kind of unpopular opinion could I possibly have about a movie that I love along with other people? Well, if you dig around the internet long enough, you'll find forums of people talking about how much they hate the character of Jenny, played by Robin Wright, who is Forrest's love interest throughout the film. And this hatred goes beyond simply saying the character is bad. All over the world, people seem to despise her with a hatred that's normally reserved for characters like Joffrey Baratheon or Laurie Grimes. Of course, these criticisms are directed at the character and not the actress, who delivers a phenomenal performance. Still, I find the hatred that people express towards Jenny to be exaggerated at best. Now, when I first saw these posts, I thought that perhaps they were right. Jenny's a complete bitch, and I just never noticed. So I decided to rewatch the movie multiple times with these criticisms in mind. However, no matter how hard I looked or how much I analyzed Jenny as a character, I could not, for the life of me, see what everyone saw. I honestly have no idea why people hate Jenny. Of course, I must elaborate, and to do that, I must debunk every single one of the major complaints against her. Because I believe Jenny is a far better character than people give her credit for. She's interesting, she's complex, tragic, and sympathetic. So here, let me give you a brief rundown of the 5 major complaints I've seen people consistently throw at Jenny. Number 1, Jenny mistreats Forrest. Number 2, Jenny strings Forrest along. Number 3, Jenny dates abusive douchebags over dating Forrest. Number 4, Jenny has sex with Forrest and then leaves the next day. And number 5, Jenny gives birth to Forrest's kid, raises him for several years, and doesn't tell him about it. Damn. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, hearing this list of complaints might get you to think, holy shit, she's a total cunt. But no, she's not, because I am going to provide counter-arguments for every single one of these complaints. Let us begin. No, she doesn't. Jenny never once hurts Forrest intentionally. Other than rejecting him the 2 times he asked her to be his girlfriend, Jenny never hurts him in any way that would be considered malicious. I mean, come on, it's rejection. Boo fuckity who. Other than that, the only times that I can think of Jenny being mad at Forrest is, well, the scene where she's about to have sex with a guy and Forrest cockblocks her, and the second time when he punches a guy at a strip club for touching her and tries to carry her out like a damsel in distress. Now, the first one is pretty understandable on Jenny's part. I mean, come on, no one likes getting cock-blocked, and honestly, considering the situation, her reaction, I'd say, is way more understanding than most of us would be. She even shouts at the guy that Forrest just has no idea what he's doing, still defending him. This doesn't sound like the mean-spirited bitch the internet describes her as. Now, in the strip club, I do have to point out that it is implied, after landing a gig as a Playboy model, Jenny was expelled from college, and this apparently seemed to be the only job she could find. So, given this context, I say it's pretty fair for her to be angry with Forrest. I mean, regardless of what you think about stripping, at the end of the day, it's a job, and let's face it, we've all had shitty jobs, and even though we'd be happy to get rid of them, in exchange of something better, of course, they are our livelihood, and if someone fucks it up, we'd be pissed despite our disdain for it. Still, much like the previous instance, Jenny's anger is short-lived. She knows Forrest was just trying to protect her, and she obviously didn't like working there anyway. And when she is angry, she doesn't say anything harsh. She merely reacts in what I consider to be very reasonable manners, and then, moves on. Honestly, the closest instance to Jenny saying something mean to Forrest is the scene where she says, "You don't know what love is," which I will argue has much more significance than Jenny simply trying to push Forrest away. Oh, speaking of, If you don't know what this means, stringing along is the act of making someone believe something that will ultimately never happen. In most cases, the phrase is used to describe someone who continuously does or says things to make another person think there's potential for a relationship. Sorry for going all Merriam-Webster on you. But anyway, this is another criticism about Jenny that is simply not true. And normally I don't like to place the blame on anyone, but I do get the feeling that the criticism stems from the nice guy syndrome. You know what I'm talking about. Those idiots that think that simply being nice to a girl means that the girl must reciprocate those feelings, and then they complain about how they can never find a girlfriend. But whatever. The point is, Jenny never strings Forrest along. How can I tell? Well, first of all, there's the fact that Jenny and Forrest are hardly together throughout the film. Yeah, Forrest was in Vietnam and only saw Jenny at Washington. Then the next time they saw each other was when she decided to visit him and get her shit together. And every single one of those instances, Forrest is already ecstatic about seeing her. Kind of hard stringing someone along when you're not even around that person. So yeah, that completely destroys this criticism. On top of that, Forrest loves Jenny unconditionally. Even if Jenny did anything to string him along, she wouldn't have to because Forrest loves her no matter what. Forrest doesn't see a woman with a troubled life. He sees her as the nice little girl that offered him a seat on the bus when no one else would. This reminds me of my best friend from childhood. Her and I basically grew up separately. We went to different high schools, hung around different people, and generally lived very different lives. But when we saw each other, it's just like Forrest said. We were like peas and carrots again. I guess this is why I can relate to Forrest and Jenny's friendship, because in many respects, I had a similar one. I miss her. Now, this goes back to what I was saying about the nice guy syndrome. It's as if Jenny has to date Forrest simply because he is the nice guy in her life. And don't get me wrong, I want Forrest to get the girl just as much as everyone else, but to say that she is a bitch simply for pushing him away romantically is pretty fucking stupid. On top of that, we only ever see her date one douchebag. This guy, right here. This is the closest thing we ever get to Jenny choosing a douchebag over Forrest, and even then, there is clearly more to this decision than simply, oh, I just want to be with him and not you. Besides, choosing someone over Forrest doesn't necessarily make her a bad person. However, I would like to throw in the argument that by not dating Forrest, Jenny demonstrates that she is in fact in love with him. Confused? Let me explain. The first thing we need to keep in mind about Jenny's character is that she was sexually abused by her father, and due to this, Jenny has a ton of emotional issues, namely low self-esteem and suicidal thoughts. After she implies that she is willing to throw herself off a bridge, it's pretty clear that Jenny has very little love for herself and doesn't seem to care about what happens to her. When she tells Forrest, you don't know what love is, she's saying this because she doesn't understand why Forrest even likes her. It's a common pitfall for people with self-esteem issues to believe that they are incapable of being loved and that they don't deserve to be happy. It's also a common thing for them to believe that they are not good enough for others, so it's safer just to reject any potential romance. So in my opinion, Jenny pushes Forrest away because she doesn't believe she deserves him. Even when she sees Forrest at Washington, D.C., I still think she chooses to leave not just because Forrest and her are living two different lives, but because she still has the same emotional baggage and doesn't want to hurt the one person she truly cares about. And it's not like this is something vague. Jenny even tells this to Forrest when she stays over with him. When she rejects Forrest's marriage proposal, she says, you don't want to marry me, which is completely different from the whole you don't know what love is. And it may not seem like much, but that is actually a very important line. It lets us know what's been going on this entire time and why Jenny has pretty much tried to push Forrest away romantically. Now, on the note of vagueness, I kind of think that that's perhaps why people don't like Jenny. Her motivations, for the most part, are never really explained. See, I understand that films are a visual medium, but emotions are very abstract, and unless we have proper context, it's hard for us to understand what a person is thinking. It also doesn't help that we hardly spend much time with her. Compare this to Lieutenant Dan, who is very much an asshole after Forrest saves his life in Vietnam, but slowly, through very well-written scenes, Dan explains that he believed his destiny was to die in the battlefield, just like his father and grandfather before him, and now he is merely a cripple, a former soldier sent back to a home where most people despise him simply for being a soldier. Here, we get to see a brief glimpse into Lieutenant Dan's mind and feelings and understand where he is coming from. Jenny never gets a scene like that. She never gets a scene where she vents and expresses all her frustrations and insecurities. Sure, there's the sometimes there just aren't enough rocks scene, but I mean, that only lets us know that she's mad at her father. The fact is, she simply does things, and for the most part, we're left wondering why. Sure, if you're a good actor or actress, you can easily convey emotion through facial expressions alone, as long as the context works. But seeing someone cry and understanding why someone is crying are actually two very distinct things. Though, I will argue that this is just as much a fault of the audience as it is a fault of the filmmakers. Without dialogue and merely through her actions, we can easily deduce what Jenny is feeling and what she is thinking. Almost everything we need to know about her is there, clear as day, for the world to see and understand. You can see her go from a hopeful young girl to a broken woman who seems to know that she is broken and doesn't think there's a way out. And when you look at her actions, Jenny is pretty consistent. She wants to achieve something, fucks up, and then is left in a pit of depression and self-loathing until Forrest manages to get her out. So, going back to the initial point, when we see Jenny choose this douchebag over Forrest, it's much more complex than her simply, choosing him over Forrest. She does it because she doesn't want to hurt him. She does it because she believes in the cause that she is following, and she does it because she doesn't believe she deserves any better. Jenny sees herself as damaged goods and nothing more. And after knowing that, it's hard to really criticize Jenny for not getting together with Forrest sooner. Okay, so out of all the complaints I've read about Jenny, this is the only one that actually makes sense. For a little context, Jenny is at the end of her rope after her latest suicide attempt. With no other place to go, she arrives at Forrest's house, out of the blue, to think her life over. She's quiet throughout most of it, and Forrest simply gives her space until she's finally ready to smile again. Eventually, Forrest asks Jenny to marry him, but Jenny, as we mentioned previously, refused. Forrest says his famous line,
"I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is."
And this gets Jenny thinking. She then walks into Forrest's bedroom, wakes him up, tells him she does love him, and has sex with him. Then she leaves the next morning. Okay, so what the fuck just happened? From what information we're given, we can extrapolate that Jenny has sex with Forrest as a way of finally taking control of her life. She's made nothing but mistake after mistake, and now she takes the opportunity to be happy. Jenny loves Forrest, and this time, she won't let her emotional issues get in the way of her being happy. So, why does she leave? This is where a conversation between Forrest and Jenny, or a scene where Jenny leaves Forrest a note explaining everything, could have helped a lot. I mean, in every other scene with Jenny, we're given visual cues that let us in on what she's thinking and feeling. Why is this scene the only exception? Jenny tells the cab driver that she isn't running away, which I'm sure is meant to tell the audience that she is planning to come back, but that's still too vague. Though I think maybe the reason she leaves is so that she could become a better person before she can confidently pursue a relationship with Forrest. Still, that's mostly speculation without any real evidence. So this is the only thing I can't confidently defend Jenny on. Okay, this one sounds bad at first, but just hear me out. After Jenny left, Forrest starts running across America, and he does so for about 3 years, 2 months, 14 days, and 16 hours. Which is a pretty specific and impressive memory for a guy like Forrest. Now, this is pretty ambiguous. Does he run for 3 years until he physically stops? Or does he run 3 years including the stroll he takes to go back? If it's the latter, then there are at least 2 or 3 years during little Forrest's life that Jenny didn't tell him about. And yet, the former is still very plausible since Forrest is definitely the kind of guy that would just kind of casually walk back to Alabama. And probably not even in a hurry, he's just kind of chilling. Anyway, Forrest running all that time provides Jenny with a pretty reasonable excuse for why she didn't tell him sooner about their child. Forrest was running from place to place with no real goal or destination. You can't simply write a person's name on an envelope and expect it to arrive somehow. I mean, only an idiot would do that. Which is actually the same thing that Forrest did in Vietnam when he kept sending Jenny letters during his time there, but since she didn't have a home and was moving from place to place, none of those letters could be sent. I love you, Forrest. Now, if you were to say that Jenny could have easily hired a courier, honestly, the courier would have faced the problem of waiting for Forrest to arrive somewhere, have TV channels cover it, and try to catch up to where he's potentially going. Yeah, so it would suck to be that guy. On top of that, Jenny was working as a waitress and spending money to raise her son. I doubt she'd have enough money to pay some guy for something like that. All she could do was wait until Forrest had arrived at his home and then finally send him the letter. Now, Google Maps says the traveling from this fucking monument in Valley, Utah, which is where he stopped, to all the way back to Alabama on foot would take about 508 hours or 21 days. That is, of course, assuming Forrest walked for 21 days straight without stopping or getting lost or simply chilling somewhere. Either way, given little Forrest's age, which is I assume to be about 4 or 5 years old, given Haley Joel Osment's age at the time, and if we go off on the notion that Forrest did indeed walk all the way back to Alabama, and it was about a year or two after Forrest arrived that he got the letter, okay, not a big number. I mean, she still took some time with that, which is reprehensible, but not quite as bad as people made it out to be, given that she was intending on contacting him again. And there's always the possibility that because she never got the news about Forrest's arrival, it took a while before she knew he had returned to Alabama. I mean, this was a time where cell phones and Twitter weren't a thing. It's not like hashtag #RunForrestRun was trending back then. And that's it, but before we move on, I would like to discuss the infamous theory about Forrest Gump, and that is the theory that Forrest isn't really the father. The theory says that Jenny was already pregnant when she arrived in Forrest's house, and that she knew she was pregnant and had sex with Forrest to trick him into believing the child was his. Or that she got pregnant after leaving Forrest, or some shit like that. However, there is multiple evidence in the film that completely shatters this theory. First of all, Jenny can't possibly be pregnant when she arrives at Forrest's house. Before that, the last time we see Jenny, she's about to commit suicide, but decides not to. This is a huge plot point in Jenny's character arc, and it's the moment she realizes she needs help, and it's the whole reason she goes to Forrest in the first place. So it's extremely doubtful that she had sex with someone else right after, or even in between. Now, that scene took place before Forrest's mom was diagnosed with cancer in 1975, and Jenny doesn't have sex with Forrest until July 4th, 1976. So she couldn't have been pregnant when she arrived. Unless she had the kid, left him with someone, visited Forrest, spent months with him, had sex, and then left thinking to herself, yeah, one day I'll trick him into thinking he has a son. Secondly, if little Forrest isn't really Forrest's son, why the fuck would Jenny name him Forrest at all? Did she know she was going to die when she had him and thought, I'll name him Forrest so I can trick Forrest into thinking that this is his son? Or did she simply think, yeah, maybe calling him Forrest will pay off in the future? Hell, she has an entire scrapbook of Forrest's appearance in the newspaper. Did she seriously do all this just to fool them both? In order for her to lie so blatantly, Jenny would have to be extremely cold and calculating, which are traits we never witness her to have. Lastly, the plan makes no sense. Jenny doesn't have to lie. Forrest already loves her unconditionally, and he would most definitely take care of the kid, even if he knew it wasn't his. She also doesn't have to marry him. She can just name him the child's legal guardian, and they're all set. I mean, maybe she does this more for the sake of her son, so, he can grow up with a father, but as stated before, Jenny would have to have some major foresight to do it. Not to mention that it's extremely out of character for her to do something like this, given that the only reason people come up with this theory at all is Jenny's a bitch, for no reason, so clearly she must have lied about it, with no actual evidence. Like I said, there's not a single shred of evidence that Jenny lied and that little Forrest isn't Forrest's kid. That's Forrest's son. Anybody saying otherwise is a fucking moron. Now, there are other criticisms that people throw at Jenny, but these are the major ones, and I wanted to debunk them to prove that Jenny isn't the horrible character everyone says she is. I know that Jenny's character motivations are all left to interpretation, so you could say that calling her a bitch is just as valid as my own perspective. However, I will stand by my own interpretation given that not only is it consistent with the character we actually see, and it's based on actual analysis and evidence, but it also goes along with the themes of the film. Forrest Gump is about destiny, about the notion of destiny and free will. Do we each have a destiny that was set out for us, or do we each choose our own path? Lieutenant Dan believed that he had a destiny, and Forrest's mom believed we each make our own destiny, and Forrest finds himself somewhere in between. But where does that leave Jenny? Well, Jenny seems to be the opposite of Lieutenant Dan. While Dan had a destiny that Forrest allegedly cheated him out of, Jenny seems to find her destiny multiple times. She was born into an abusive household, had to become a stripper, and lived a life that was filled with depression and suicidal tendencies. She fights a lot for what she wants, and whenever she's down, Forrest picks her up and she tries again. It may sound twisted, but given the mistakes she makes and how much she punishes herself for them, it almost seems like her destiny was to die a nameless corpse on the street. But instead, she died shortly after marrying Forrest. And that's where the bittersweetness of Jenny's character comes into play. Does Jenny prove that destiny is inescapable because her past ultimately caught up to her? Or does she prove the power of free will by not allowing herself to succumb to her demons? And she dies in a warm bed next to the people she loved. I don't know if I should consider her death a happy ending or a tragic one. She didn't get to grow old with Forrest or see her son grow up, but she was there with them until the end. And in the end, I guess that's all you can really ask for. I do know one thing, and that is that I can't hate Jenny. She is complex, she's sympathetic, she's tragic. I love this character, and the more I analyzed her, the more fascinated I became with her and this movie. Forrest Gump is a brilliant film, and I think Jenny gets very unfair criticism most of the time. I could be wrong, and I'm just trying to see the nothing but good in a movie I love. However, I see Jenny the same way Forrest does, as a hopeful and kind young girl with dreams that are ultimately shattered by reality. Anyways, this has been Group Breaker Movies, and I'll see you guys next time.